In the 1970s, the Albury Wodonga Development Corporation played an important role in the ongoing progress and history of Albury Wodonga.
Hello, my name is John Alker-Jones. I came to Albury Wodonga with the Albury Wodonga Development Corporation in 1974. I thought it was going to be a short-term contract, but some 40 years later, I'm still here. It shows what a good place it is. In 74, we were starting to acquire the land for the Development Corporation. An area, it was called a designated area, of some 50,000 hectares was prescribed in both sides of Albury and Wodonga to accommodate the proposed 300,000 population that was supposed to have been achieved by the year 2000 or thereabouts. In the end, of the 50,000 hectares, only 24,000, about half, was actually acquired. And it's interesting, if you would look at a map, just to see why and how they designated that land, especially in terms of open space and trails. If you look around, you can see the ring of hills, albeit in the distance, all the way around Albury Wodonga. So Albury Wodonga sits in a basin and is defined by these hills. The hills were defined as being part of the designated area, one, to protect the landscape, so you didn't have houses creeping up the hills, and also because there was a major floodplain in the middle of this big basin, was to acquire land to protect it for environmental, recreational and other sort of qualities that the corporation felt it had to achieve. There were sort of many tenets of what was expected of the corporation. There was social cohesion, economic development, obviously growth, but most importantly, I think in many ways, was to ensure that the environment was not in any way compromised. And so to have control over the land and to be able to direct what is good and what was bad, that was an important part of the corporation's early achievements, was setting up of what was called the Peter Till Laboratory, so they could monitor the water, monitor the air quality, and monitor whatever on earth they thought was appropriate to ensure we as the planners and if you like, the developers were doing the right thing. Now here you have a perfect example of what was in fact happening in Albury Wodonga, especially on the floodplain. This is part of an old gravel pit that the corporation bought, and was very concerned to ensure that the plethora of gravel pits all through the floodplain, and if you look on an aerial photo you can see them, little pock marks everywhere, were actually properly controlled. Otherwise farmers would decide he wants a ton of this or a ton of that and would go and scoop it out, and that was sort of the level of control that was being exercised, i.e. very little or nothing. So the corporation started to develop policies on how the floodplain should operate. And so of the 24,000 hectares that was finally bought, the majority of it in fact was floodplain and hilltops, and also obviously land where the housing and residential areas were to occur. And we then had to mould that into residential, as I say, areas from farm and cow paddocks. They literally were dairy paddocks out Thaguna. The hilltops were fairly heavily grazed, I'm afraid to say. They were nude most of the time, and so part of the process was how to transform those good elements into either better elements or to restore those that had been had suffered, if you like, from excessive farming, excessive tree clearing, or just excesses of commercial nature that you don't see or don't know what's going to happen until sometimes when it's too late. So we got together obviously a lot of plans and ideas that had to look at the road, the transport system that was going to serve the area. What do we do with these gravel pits? In fact, this one was thought to have been a magnificent opportunity between the two cities for a major rowing course. And so not only would you use the existing gravel ponds, but you would actually extract more gravel around the corner, so to speak, and have major international rowing sections. Unfortunately, it was a bit expensive, and it may well happen, but possibly not in my lifetime. But it was there, it's an asset, and it was part of that sort of long-term thinking. You couldn't afford to do anything on sort of 2 or 3 year cycles as the political cycles tended to go, and that was part of, I think, the corporation's dilemma. I'm not sure how many I could find out, I suppose, but I'd hazard it's probably several hundred ministers that related to the corporation. We had the federal government, we had the two state governments. So they each had a minister for decentralisation or a minister for this, that and the other. Then you had the 7 councils as they were in those days. Several have been amalgamated. So you were pushed and pulled and shoved and poked and what have you from all directions. But you forged on, and with the vision that you had, you started to generate plans that were consistent for a population of 300,000. Now, as I said before, one of the major problems was restoring the land that had been overused or perhaps just ignored. So we set up a nursery of our own. The problem of getting plants here was the provenance, that is to say, did they actually come from this area? And that was very hard to do because, well, no particular nursery was set up to mass produce, not quite millions, but probably went to millions of trees over time. So whilst we had to bring a lot of plants in, the only solution was, in fact, to generate our own plants in our own nursery. And a fellow called Harry Jacobs, who was a experienced Dutchman from all around the world, and came up and helped set up the nursery. One of the intriguing things with nurseries is your strike rate. When you put it in, will it stay there? Will it grow? Will it take? And part of the issue is not so much the skill in the planting, but it's also the skill in raising the stock. And again, the other problem with that is competing weeds. So Harry came on the idea that we'd actually steam clean, literally steam the soil before it was used in the potting. And I think our strike rate of all the plants is something like about 96%. We've probably got 100%, so we've probably got some 0%. But overall, I think about 96% was the going rate, so to speak, of all those things that we wanted to happen. Now, as I said, some of the hills were denuded, so we set about a forward tree planting program that utilised all of Harry's products, and so we've gone out and created what we called the forward tree planting program. We knew the areas where we wanted to develop in the residential and commercial areas, and so you would start to say, well, there's walkways or there's creeks or there's whatever feature there that you want to enhance. So you go out and forward plant those many years in advance of your actual development. Same in the residential areas. And to a degree, with not knowing exactly what might happen in 10 or 15 years' time, you also went out and planted great blocks of plants in areas that would be seen to be particularly under stress. We'd help that, or the hilltops, and now you can see all around Albury Wodonga a magnificent urban forest situation. What the Catchkai became the city in the country and the country in the city. So we were sort of working from inside out and outside in type of thing. And so you go back to all the hilltops I was mentioning. A lot of that is now managed by Parklands or by Wodonga Council or Albury City Council or the Department of Lands. And between the various bodies that have an interest in that, we've generated something like about 4,000 hectares of public access land that is walking trails, obviously, land like this, which is leased to various canoe clubs and rowing clubs and anyone else who has a water interest. And then there's the habitat protection one. I'm just looking around here as well. There's the ironbarks here, and that was a forward tree planting program, not so much here, but in Thaguna. And we were looking at possibly an expansion of a development in Thaguna, and these ironbarks were attracting an unusual species, or an endangered species, the Regent honeyeater, which would migrate from south of Victoria through the Chiltern Forest. And they found this marvellous place called Thaguna and took up residence there, sort of unrequired, unexpected, and they thought it was a pretty good spot, and then would commute further up to Queensland as part of their cyclical route. And some sharp-eyed person noticed this, and we were made aware of it, and we were in a dilemma between, do we actually knock down some of this forward tree planting, because it wasn't necessarily sacrosanct, it was part of a design, but how do we deal with the Regent honeyeater? And again, to cut a long story short, it turned out to be a bit of a catch-cry. It was called the Regent money eater, because it cost us so much to either extend or remove the development opportunities that we were sort of taken up to somewhere else. And from that particular program, we started to recognise that there was a long-term value in having particular recognition of species or of some aspect. There was the squirrel glider also in the area, and so with a survey with a couple of threatened species specialists, Ian Davidson for one, we were able to map in through Thurgoona all of the locations which we thought would be an ideal position, I suppose, specific conversation for these two particular animals. And it was important that we got the confidence of the locals who had seen the Regent honeyeater, the Department of Lands and all of the authorities, and together with the corporation we're able to meld a plan to which a lot of the land in Thurgoona is held in perpetuity now for these sorts of opportunities occurring. And so the locals there look after it in many ways. Parklands help. There's the Albury Conservation group that are out there and doing those things. It's all part of the long-term hope, I think, for Albury Wodonga and others to follow. It was cited, I think, many times as being a benchmark for others to follow, and in a similar vein, on the Wodonga side, we also produced a number of plants or plans, should I say, which they're following today, and that'll benefit the next generation, hopefully generations afterwards. So it's been a labour of love and a labour of frustration at times, because, as I said, the objectives were for 300,000, the population. When Gough didn't agree with some of his political advisors, that he was thrown out, as you know, Gough Whitlam, and then things started to go from good to bad. His plan for decentralisation was watered down dramatically, and so growth areas like Albury Wodonga and Bathurst Orange and such like were slowly in the political stranglehold. As I mentioned earlier, it's something like several hundred ministers, and so you're virtually getting a new minister every 6 months or thereabouts, having to bring him up to speed, and then you got him up to speed and he gets moved or the government dissolves or whatever happens, and so you're in a constant battle of trying to sort of keep the money flowing and the ideas flowing. And you have to give it to Gordon Craig, who was, if you like, the first CEO and, if you like, chairman of the corporation. He kept at them, and he was I think the Mr. Albury Wodonga, I would say, in my mind, in my presence anyway. He was good. The talk of the regeneration reminded me that we were very keen to ensure that the forward tree planting was worth something, not only visually. I mean, it became the home of the honeyeater, as I mentioned, but it was also interesting that an independent study by the New South Wales Forestry Commission, as it was known in those days, had looked at a number of reserves in the southern riverina that would be representative of what you'd expect to find in if you like, an undisturbed patch of dirt on the Murray or up a hill, and they surveyed and looked at all the number of birds and the sort of insects and animals and snakes and whatever else might be there. Then they did a survey of the corporation's forward tree planting, and they found that the number of species that had returned, who were re-utilising the blocks there, was very similar to what they had in terms of birds and animals and what have you. In some cases, I think exceeded the numbers. The only thing that we didn't seem to be getting back were the snakes and sort of those sort of slow-moving ones that are unfortunately very scary to some people. And so the forward tree planting program, as well as the other sort of general landscaping through here, I mean, those who would know the Lincoln Causeway would see it and remember it as a giant tip in some ways. And but the forward tree planting here, I think, shows you what you can do, and what we have done, as I say, in the for the trails and for Albury Wodonga as a whole. The best way to look at it sometimes is actually go to the hilltops around, and you can look down and you can see where the houses are. In fact, you can't see where the houses are because it's full of darn trees. But you know, it does illustrate the fact that by comparing photos of the early dairy farming days and what you see now, you don't see suburbs of houses. You see suburbs covered in trees, which I think is an important benefit for all to reflect on. Part of the issues we did have was with the local fire brigades of some of these tree planting areas, and we had and probably rightly too, that they were concerned about fires and such like, and ultimately we were able to persuade them with proper management and maintenance, which we had provided. The tree issue, sorry, the fire issue was one that we had taken into account, and we worked with them. But one of the funny ones, in fact, was the fire at the corporation's offices at Thaguna in probably the mid-80s. I was in fact on holidays in Tassie, and I came back to this story that the corporation was on fire, and what had actually happened, it wasn't the trees around the corporation, it was the tanbark caught fire and got underneath one of the fire trucks, and so there was everyone sort of jumping around having what I imagine would be a bit of a scary time, having a fire under your truck there. But yeah, so we suffered the ignominy of having a fire, but not through forward tree planting. You've got a picture of what I see as Albury Wodonga being now, 2017, and what it would be like in 2030. Well, I do think we'll see more trees. I do think that places like this will become much more popular as they're in between the two cities. I think recreational aspects, if you read the sort of the science journals, the New Scientist, for example, talking about artificial intelligence doing all the robotic work, people are going to have much more recreational time. They're also going to have problems, I think, with transport. In 2030, will we still have sort of fossil fuels being used? I suspect not. I think we'll be going more for electric cars, or we might have a public transport. The major highway through here might in fact be 50% public transport and only 50%, say, cars on one side and transport on the other. So I think it will grow. We might even get a railway system by then from Melbourne to Sydney or Melbourne to Albury working properly. But I think as cities get larger, I think the attraction, like places like Albury Wodonga, who can provide you with good services, medical, commercial, recreational, they're the ones I think who are going to benefit, and I think we've laid a good foundation here for particularly the recreational side. I think also the commercial side, the industrialist. I mean, part of the corporation's objective was not to focus on one type of industry, but to have, if you like, a cross-section of what Australia is made up of and try and replicate that. So you've got a whole range of working opportunities for all sorts of requirements, from electronics through to whatever takes your fancy in many ways. It's up to the population now to sort of see and look forward to jobs and growth as the current sort of catch cry seems to be. But I think Albury Wodonga will survive. It'll grow. In fact, there was an interesting book by, the name eludes me for the moment, but it was mainly talking about the impact of climate change, and it was suggesting that the low-lying areas around Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane will ultimately be consumed by water. No matter how big a barrage you put up, it'll ultimately go. The airports will go, and blah blah blah. And he was saying that there was places like Albury Wodonga on this side of the divide who have a railway system, and they were the ones who will probably capitalise on the downside of climate change, But it won't be easy. I mean, we won't be handed on a plate, but you'll be in a position that's physically more amenable to life than it will be on the surf side of Australia, which will be flooded. And so he painted a fairly rosy picture of economic development between Albury and Wodonga using the railway system. And he even made further suggestions that the people from Melbourne and Sydney need to be replaced or relocated, and we might actually start a new agrarian society. That's a bit extreme, I know, but it's interesting the different pictures you can look at and see, wow, is that going to be us? Is that going to be them? You know, I'm all right, Jack. You stay on your seaside suburbs, but no, there would be benefits to Albury Wodonga being on the right side of the rain shadow, right side of the divide. But ignoring all the extremist views like that, I think we're well set for continued growth. Fast growth as we'd liked it to have been would have been, I think, a bit hard to handle. You've got to have the infrastructure, and as I've said recently, it's been a most successful failure. Failure in the sense that it didn't achieve the 100 or the 300,000, but successful in the sense that we've got 2 universities, we've got several hospitals, we've got open space systems, we've got good transport systems, so we're living pretty well at the moment, I'd say. I think we've got all those things that we need, and we'll have more of them as we go on. I know myself, as I get older, you know, the visits to the doctor or the hospital are so easy here. You know, we're very lucky. I think there's the beauty of hindsight is a marvellous thing. Some who are involved would look back and hopefully I think they would say, hell, we missed an opportunity there. Infighting was terrible. It was corporation against this council, that council and the corporation against this lot, and there were different factions, and over time that you didn't know quite who you were fighting half the time. It was why was the more important thing. You may know who it was, but why you were fighting was damn stupid. But I think what will happen, it will be the youngsters will come in. Albury Wodonga Corporation, what are they? Oh, hang on, I've heard about them. Didn't they do some sort of obscure thing? And so I suppose the answer is those who were involved would recognise the loss. The youngsters coming up would say, perhaps, why the hell did you let it go? And then after them they'll say, oh well, that was just a matter of history, I imagine. That's an unfortunate thing. It's a bit like you look at Canberra, Walter Burley Griffin. Yeah, you'll all talk about him, but you don't really know what was behind him and the problems he had trying to get Canberra going. And Menzies didn't like Canberra, and half the politicians didn't like Albury Wodonga for different reasons. And so you'll come back and you'll enjoy the walks around Canberra, the lakes, obviously, the Carillions, all of the art centres, and but you won't know of the background, the heartache, and the you know, people wanted to put their lives on the line. I know several who died here. I wouldn't say necessarily through sort of work, but you know, there's people who've come here and lived through it, and yeah, it's a pity really, because it was a golden opportunity, partially lost. Not, you know, sort of we didn't quite grab it all. It was what's that, man's reach should exceed the stars, whatever his grasp for. I forget what it was, but there's something like that. We should have perhaps tried harder. I don't know. The locals should have tried harder. Everyone should have tried harder. A man's grasp should a man's grip should exceed his grasp. Otherwise, what are the heavens for? You know, sort of making you stretch out.